edit it.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, circling back to the Hebrews 11. That you look in that passage, and to me, it's Joseph's entry that really sticks out. It doesn't talk about any of his accomplishments. And you look, you go, there's a fifth of the book of Genesis that details his life.
Right.
You have a million things you could pick from to say about his life, and you take the last little segment of Genesis 15. It says, he told his descendants to the third generation to look towards the Exodus and to make sure that they took his bones. Mm-hmm. And again, right, he had the forethought of the vision to think of the future. And again, like you said, I think you point out very well that right there was nothing special or magical about his bones, but again, just that deep sense of the idea, right, of don't leave your identity, don't leave the past of who you are as the Israelite people behind. Take that with you. So I think that's when we look at that fourth path of moving forward, that there are certainly some things that we want, right, about our identity and who we are. Mm-hmm. And again, this, I think, brings us back to our bigger narrative that we want to circle of talking about the gospel and the meaning of the gospel and how we see that, especially how we see that playing out in the future. Mm-hmm. So,
well, and the whole process of God taking them into a new country and all that involved, into the promised land, is God reminding them of who he is, but also saying there is something new for you. And I think probably the next step we're going to make is they're kind of rebelling, they're pushing back, and saying, well, we'd like to go back. And there's some good conversation that we've had around that. But God is basically saying to them, there's something new that I want to do with you. You can't stay where you were in order for you to engage in this new thing. Don't forget who you were. Don't certainly forget who I am and what I have done. But be aware that there's something new that I want to do that you can't experience back there.
And that's the thing, the truth of the matter is, we all looking at this, we go back, say, well, obviously there was no life back, for them back there in Egypt. And there wasn't, right? They were slaves. But in that moment, that's all that they knew.
Yeah.
Right? So understanding that this is a whole paradigm shift for them. This is a brand new way of thinking. And it's amazing when you've held on to a hope for something for so long, for generations, right? And all of a sudden it becomes to fruition and it begins to take root. You're like, wait a minute, I'm not sure we want this
right.
after all, because it's been so far down the road and all of it, that it's hard to see what it is when it finally arrives.
Well, think about it, right? These last 6 weeks have it has been like a season of Jubilee, right? Where you have just been freed from really just about everything. And we're not even comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, and it is, right? Because I've always said I wished for this, right? A slower life, slower pace of things, a chance to be home with my wife and kids. Now you have it. I don't want that either.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So the next, and move on to the next.
Yeah. Let's go to Exodus. 14.
So I'm going to start reading in verse, I think it was 10 is where we started.
Yeah.
As Pharaoh approached the people of Israel, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? Why? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better that we be enslaved in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness." But Moses told the people, "Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm." And then, of course, from there rolls right into the Red Sea narrative. And I think we love to talk about the Red Sea story, right?
Yep.
And how God provides a way. There's an Ellie Holcomb song that I love, Red Sea Road, right? And it talks about how God doesn't bring us this far to just leave us high and dry. He prepares a way even when there seems to be no way.
Yeah.
but we jump right into the excitement of that story and kind of forget about the toil that went into that. Can you imagine being one of these Egyptians who had this long held promise? Then Moses comes and says, we're gonna do this, we're gonna be freed. And then you watch all of these plagues happen, right? Culminating right in the death of these firstborn, and your firstborn kids were spared. And finally Pharaoh says, get out, right?
Yep.
And then he changes his mind. Can you imagine being in that place where Pharaoh and his army is bearing down on you and there is no place to go?
Yeah.
And you know that God has led you not by the direct route, but out here into the wilderness.
Yeah.
The fear and the frustration and the trepidation, and they go,
It certainly doesn't look like rescue.
no, it doesn't. And maybe it would have been better for us to be slaves in Egypt than to be corpses in the wilderness. And just thinking about going into a new day is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the statistic is that when forced with the decision between death or change, 90% of the time we choose death. Whether that's an individual who the doctor says you need to you change your eating habits, change your health patterns, or you're going to die, we choose death. Whether that's a church or an organization that says if you don't make some radical changes, your organization's going to die, we will remain complacent. Because change is hard. Because it trusts us to do this, to be forced into that wedge, into that difficult place where the past is bearing down on you, even though it wasn't great, and uncertainty lies ahead, and you've got to just step back and stand still.
Well, and the Israelites
And that doesn't come naturally.
No, not at all. And the Israelites are perfect examples of when we don't know what is next, we would rather choose the broken thing we left behind.
Yeah.
They are perfect examples of this. Unless we judge them too harshly, we do the same dumb
Absolutely.
thing.
All the time.
And it's easy to look at this because we know the punchline. We know how this turns out. How dare they? How could they not trust Moses? How could they not believe the promises that they've been told for generations? How could they want to turn tail and go back to the broken thing that they left behind? And yet, we do the same thing. The same thing. And all of the instances that you named, whether it is our personal health, organizations we're a part of, job changes, all of that, we do the same thing. When it is uncertain, we get scared. And let's be really clear, most of us don't like to walk willy-nilly into pitch black without any light. We don't like doing that. That is against, there's probably some understanding of human nature, of self-preservation. We go, no, thank you. I don't want to.
Right.
I don't want to go that way.
Yep.
And yet, God is continually saying to them, do not forget who I am. Do not forget what I have done for you. I've heard your cry. All of those things. I'm with you. Your uncertainty is no match for my care.
And so I think that's kind of the answer to path 2, right?
Yeah.
Of do you really just want to go back?
Right.
And that's not the answer.
Right.
Right? And yes, things do look uncertain. Things do look maybe unwinnable, or it looks like you're being defeated.
Yes.
But the same thing, right? Those memorials, that Ebenezer, right? That means, right, thus far, God is with us.
Yeah.
And so the same thing. And again, this, maybe that's part of what this whole COVID thing will be, is that will be an Ebenezer, right? Where it'll be a memorial that we'll look back on and say, look, God was in that.
Stone of remembrance.
Right? Yeah, right. He saw the church through that, and it is, right? It is that cornerstone, right? You're either going to build upon it or get broken on it.
Yeah.
And so what's the path forward? Because being broken on it, it's the path back. Heading backwards. So,
And, the truth is, God has proven his faithfulness time and time again to the people of God, and yet somehow we still struggle to really put our faith into that and to step back and to trust.
yeah.
And I think this is a good reminder. This is a good time to be reminded that we are his church. We are his people.
Yeah.
We are his to sustain. We are his to provide for. We are his to protect. We don't have to assume that mantle and take. And right now is the time, especially when days are uncertain and everything is so contingent upon finances in our culture. And so when people don't have money or they're not sure what's going to happen, they don't spend money. The economy begins to adjust. People begin losing jobs, as we've already seen. And then, for us as churches, that translates into diminished tithes, or people who maybe still have jobs aren't giving as freely as they should be. So there's so much uncertainty in that. And I have had some very real conversations about that this week for our church, and have had to just remind myself, we are His to sustain.
Yep.
He has sustained His church through far worse things over the last 2,000 years, and He has sustained His people through far worse things over the last however many thousands of years. He will sustain His church through this. Now, how that looks locally, who knows? But the truth of the matter is, the mission of God does not die with us. Right?
Yeah. I think, and then the last passage we're going to look at was Exodus 16. Do you want me to read that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I think just going to look at verses 1 through 3. It says, Then the whole Israelite community set out from Elim and then came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron.
I'm so glad that doesn't happen anymore.
Yes. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat, and we ate all the food we wanted. But you've brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death." And again, just from the biblical record, I mean, you saw how cruel the Pharaoh was to them, of doubling the brick quota and lessening the straw and killing the firstborn boys so that there wouldn't be an overpopulation. I highly doubt they had pots of meat.
In all that I have read about slavery, I don't remember anybody talking about we were fed so well.
Right.
I don't remember that. I don't remember reading that, seeing any stories, movies about that. And this brings us to something you had said earlier. We sometimes have a false sense of what was.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't remember things well, especially when things are bad, when the chips are down and it looks like certain death. Well, I fondly remember X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z never happened.
Yeah.
Those things were not a part of the story you're talking about.
Or they happened, but they were obscure and they didn't happen the way we remember.
Yeah.
I mean, this just, of course, who knows for sure, but as you're reading or we're talking about this vision in my mind, maybe once, because of some obscure circumstances, they had a pot of meat to sit around, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And the stars have never aligned again for that. Yeah, exactly. But there was that one thing that happened, and we remember, we totally misremember the context of it or anything, but we glorify it like, oh, things were so good.
Yes.
And what I find, and this was, we had a whole bunch of side conversations earlier today, but when we look at this picture between a wrathful God and a gracious God, and we see that even in their grumbling and complaining, even in their misremembering or wanting to rewrite history or deconstruct and whatever, the Lord says, "You know what? Fine. You will wake up every morning, and there will be manna on the ground. I will bring quail. I will send a wind and bring the quail in off the sea, and you'll have." I think at one point it says, they were almost puking on the meat. There was so much, And so even in their grumbling and complaining and ungratefulness, God says, "I love you. Look, I'll prepare things for you." And so to me, and I think it's a little bit of that third, this third area that even if we've had to play catch up with the tech stuff, right? The tech stuff is here.
Right.
Right, and we're still able to communicate. And I'm telling you, I know just as you guys are, I am. I love seeing the different people pop on the Sunday mornings or the Tuesday night worships, or I think we're broadcasting this Wednesdays, and you see people pop up and you see the comments and you see the likes, and so that your folks are engaging with it and hearing the discussions that are going on. And And like I've said too in some of the other videos, of just having people from your past and people maybe outside of your church circle that are engaging
Right.
or at least listening or watching. So there's even when times are tough, God says, "Look, I'll bless this.
Yeah.
I'll multiply this. You'll be okay."
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, and this kind of leads us to the fourth piece of a new story. I don't think, and this is just very from a personal standpoint of what we are doing. I don't think if COVID had ever happened, we wouldn't be doing this.
Right.
We would not be doing this. Now, this was I was telling somebody the other day, maybe last
we
week.
should have been, but
Maybe we should have been.
but-
Well, yes. Because what was comfortable, what was known, is what we were doing. And we're like, well, there's no need to do anything else.
Yeah.
And I told somebody the other day, I said, this is reflective a little bit of our Monday morning breakfast conversations. Because we would,
Yeah.
now, granted, we venture off into really ridiculous stuff sometimes. But sometimes it was this kind of deep stuff that we would talk about and would play into my understanding of theology and who God is and what he's doing with me and what I need to do next steps for me as a pastor. If this thing had never happened, this thing, I don't think
Right.
would have happened.
Yeah.
There wouldn't have been any reason to explore something different and something new. Not that, again, to refresh what one of you guys had said earlier, not that what we did before was bad,
sure,
because it was perfect for a time.
that time.
Right.
Yep.
But there's something new that is happening.
Yeah.
So let's be sure that we don't miss that opportunity. I mean, quite honestly, there have been, like what you hinted at, there have been a number of hurdles. The learning curve on all this tech stuff and broadcasting what you're doing on a Sunday morning or whatever else. There's a learning curve, and there's been some fumbles along the way. So it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
The new story is not easy,
Right.
Yeah.
but it's been worth it.
Well, and to me, as we talk about, and again, I think just staying in this narrative, what I think is beautiful, one of the pieces that I just come back to that I just think is always amazing, is they eventually do enter this promised land.
Mm-hmm.
They eventually do enter into a place where there's cities they didn't have to build, there's vineyards they didn't have to plant, and I think if we're not careful, we're going to find ourselves in a new place soon, I think, and we're going to grumble and complain about that too. Well, I really wanted the 4-bedroom house, and instead I got the 3-bedroom, or I really wanted the fig vineyard and not the olive. You're like, shut up! You didn't have to plant it. You didn't have to build it. And again, is that some of this stuff, right? We go, hey, we got a studio set up now. We have all the equipment.
Right.
This is a relatively easy, not easy, but it's getting to be easier and easier to
Right.
do every week,
Yeah.
right? Because you're learning and you're. And the same thing. Some of the people that I'm watching, on YouTube, I won't mention any names. Don't want to prejudice anybody one way or the other. But one of the guys I watched, this is what he said. He goes, "I was kind of ahead on the curve on this." He says, 2 years ago, I put in a studio in my home. So he hasn't missed a beat, really. Because he's had all that stuff set up. And so the same thing. I just think there's things that as we do move forward, I think there is a new path to a promised land, and it is. It's to continue to trust the Lord, and
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I think what we see through the exile narrative is that God is, for one thing, as we've said, I think we've all said at different times over and over this morning, he's faithful. He is always
Yep.
Yes.
he is always being faithful to his people to fulfill the promises. That sometimes the way that God works and does things is not the way that we would choose. We don't always get to the end. Sometimes there's some jazz and improv along the way.
Sure.
But that.
We ready to roll that out?
And then, but that God is never done with his people. And what I mean by that is there's no circumstance, there is no pandemic, there is no tragedy, that God stops leading his people through.
Yep.
Yeah, amen.
It might change how we understand ourselves. It might create a new day, a new story, a new way of being and understanding ourselves as church, as the people of God. But he is present. I think you had said it, Jet, before earlier today. He wasn't surprised by this.
Yeah.
And so I think despite the fact that we are frustrated, that we are weary. I think I can safely say we are weary of COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That we want culture to go back to normal. That, despite all of those things, there is much reason to be optimistic.
Yeah.
There is much
Definitely.
to be hopeful about.
Yep.
And we have seen God prove himself all throughout Scripture to continue to lead and walk with his people through the difficult places in life.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're turning to a new chapter, if this is a new story, God is in it, and he's leading. And there probably is no life in going back. There is no life. We can go back to being slaves to options 1 through 3.
Yep.
Or we can trust God to lead us into the wilderness. And I think that's where we'll find life.
Yep. I think we'll continue to explore then, right? What do we see the gospel message, right? How do we see that being played out, right, in our lives? What do we see that the purpose of the gospel being? Not just to us, obviously, as pastors, but to our people. And so, I think so. Any other closing? You summed that up very well.
Yeah.
It was good. You landed the plane.
Very good.
Landed the plane wonderfully.
All right.
Well, again, thank you for joining us this morning. And again, we hope and pray that the Lord's peace is upon you. And have a great day. Thank you.